Today we are reading in Know Canada, Chapter 10, page 78, The Geography of Canada. Canada is a very large country. It is the second largest country in the world. It is so large that it has 6 different time zones. It is surrounded on 3 sides by water: the Atlantic Ocean in the east, the Pacific Ocean in the west, and the Arctic Ocean in the north. Our southern border with the United States is 6,400 kilometers long. 292 kilometers is through the water of the Great Lakes. Our western border with the United States, which separates the Yukon and the northern part of British Columbia from Alaska, is 2,500 kilometers long. At a total of 8,900 kilometers, Canada and the U.S. have the longest undefended border in the world. There are about 34 million people living in Canada. Actually, I Googled that this morning and it said 37.5 million people, so the country is growing. Most live in cities, and most of the cities are in the southern part of the country. Many of the largest cities are near the border with the United States. The capital of Canada is Ottawa, Ontario. This is where the federal government has its parliament buildings and its offices. Ottawa is the 4th largest city in Canada. The area surrounding Ottawa is called the National Capital Region. Across the Ottawa River is Hull, Quebec, which is part of the National Capital Region. There are 10 provinces and 3 territories. Each province and territory has its own capital city and its own provincial or territorial government. The provinces and territories with their capital cities are listed on page 45 of the Discover Canada Guide. You should know them. Canada has many geographical areas. There are 5 distinct regions: the Atlantic Provinces, Central Canada, the Prairie Provinces, the West Coast, and the Northern Territories. The Atlantic Provinces have a different climate and geography than the West Coast. The Prairie Provinces are different from Central Canada. Some parts of the country are rocky and may have poor soil. Some are covered in trees, and some are almost treeless. Some parts are so cold it is difficult for even small bushes to grow. Other parts are covered in forests that are hundreds of years old. Some areas have good soil for growing crops, while other places are only suitable for grazing animals. How people make a living depends on the nature of the region in which they live. There are 2 important features of Canada's geography that affect life in Canada. One is water, and the other is a geographical feature called the Canadian Shield. We know that Canada is surrounded on 3 sides by saltwater oceans, but Canada also has a lot of fresh water. There are many large lakes and river systems. 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie, are shared by Canada and the United States. The other Great Lake, Lake Michigan, is in the United States. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world, and the other 4 Great Lakes are in the top 20 of the largest freshwater lakes in the world. 4 other lakes in Canada, Great Bear Lake, Great Slave Lake, Lake Winnipeg, and Lake Athabasca, are also in the top 20. There are many large and small rivers and many smaller lakes. One of the largest river systems is the Mackenzie River system. It is about 1,700 kilometers long, and it empties into the Arctic Ocean. Other rivers empty into the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and Hudson's Bay. It is actually possible to travel by water from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Rocky Mountains. You can understand why lakes and rivers were very important to Aboriginal peoples and to the fur traders in Canada's early history. The Canadian Shield is an important geographic area in Canada. It stretches across most of northern Canada and covers over half of Canada. Only British Columbia and the Atlantic provinces, not including Labrador, do not have areas of Canadian Shield. Thousands of years ago, this land was covered by glaciers. When the glaciers melted, they left a landscape of thin soil, lakes, bogs, rocks, and forests. It is also an area that is rich in minerals like nickel, gold, silver, zinc, iron, and copper. Any province or territory that has some Canadian Shield will have some mining industries. But the largest area of Canadian Shield are in Ontario and Quebec. Mining is one of the main reasons that these two provinces have more manufacturing industries than other provinces. Questions. What oceans are on Canada's borders? Well, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Arctic Ocean. How many people live in Canada? The document said 34 million, but it's actually on Google 37.5 million. What is the capital of Canada? Ottawa. What province is it in? Ontario. Number 4. How many provinces and territories are there? 10 provinces and 3 territories. Name them and their capital cities. Oh dear, we'll cover that in class. Just quickly, it's Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And we'll go over the capitals in our class on Tuesday. Name the Great Lakes. Well, there'd be Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Michigan. What is the Canadian Shield? It's a rocky part of Canada that was covered by glaciers anciently, and then the glaciers receded or melted off. Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada consists of 4 provinces that are either bordered by the Atlantic Ocean or surrounded by it. Each province is a little different, but the main industries of fishing, farming, forestry, and mining all involve natural resources. Winters are generally cold, but not as cold as some other regions. Summers can be cooler and more humid, wet, than other parts of Canada. These provinces are important to Canada because they were some of the first areas to be settled. Newfoundland and Labrador. Newfoundland and Labrador is the most easterly province in Canada. Newfoundland is an island and Labrador is part of the mainland. It has a small population. Only about 5,000 people live in the province. However, Newfoundland and Labrador has a rich history linked to the sea. The British and French built fishing villages there more than 400 years ago, and Newfoundland was the oldest colony in the British Empire. Newfoundland is also known as the Rock because it is so rocky. Some say that the province is the wettest, windiest, foggiest, cloudiest, and snowiest region in Canada. The soil is shallow, so growing food is difficult. Most people make a living in jobs related to fishing. But offshore oil and gas extraction has become an important industry, along with hydroelectricity. St. John's is the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. Labrador is separated from Newfoundland by the Strait of Belle Isle. Labrador is more rugged, barren, and even colder than Newfoundland. In the north, it is treeless. In the south, there are spruce forests, bogs, and more rocky land. Fishing villages dot the coast. Giant icebergs float down Iceberg Alley in the summer, and whale watching is a favorite tourist attraction. Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island is the smallest province in Canada, both in population and in size. Just over 1,400 people live there. The climate is mild and the soil is extremely good. The main industry is agriculture, especially potatoes. Tourism is also important. The novel Anne of Green Gables, written by Lucy Maud Montgomery, was set in Prince Edward Island. Many of the tourist attractions are centered around places and events from the Anne novels. The beaches are also attractive to tourists. PEI is connected to the mainland of Canada by the Confederation Bridge, which was completed in 1997. It is almost 13 kilometers long, and it is the longest bridge over ice-covered water in the world. It takes 12 minutes to drive over it by car. Charlottetown is the capital of Prince Edward Island. Charlottetown is often called the birthplace of Confederation, even though PEI didn't join Canada until 1873, 6 years after Canada became a country. Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is almost entirely surrounded by water. It consists of a peninsula jutting out from the mainland of North America, plus Cape Breton Island at the northern tip of the peninsula. It has a mild climate in the winter, but it is cool in the summer. The uplands are hilly and forested. Some of this land is still unsuitable for settlement. The lowlands have some good soil, but only about 10% of the province has good farmland. The Bay of Fundy, located on the west side of Nova Scotia, is famous for having the world's highest tides. Nova Scotia has been called the Atlantic Gateway to Canada because it has good ports that are important for trade with Europe. Shipbuilding and shipping are important industries in Nova Scotia. Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia, is Canada's largest East Coast seaport. It is ice-free. Deepwater Port has the largest naval base in Canada. The port is important for both trade and defense. Other industries are coal mining, forestry, agriculture, and offshore oil and gas. Nova Scotia was first colonized by the French, but after the deportation of the Acadians, many new settlers came from Scotland. The name Nova Scotia means New Scotland. The province celebrates its Scottish traditions with over 700 festivals a year. New Brunswick. 90% of New Brunswick is still covered by forests. 25% of goods produced in New Brunswick are related to the forest industry. The rest of its industry is related to farming, fishing, and mining, food processing, and tourism. The Appalachian Mountains are in the west. The Central Highlands are rocky and covered in forests. The Southern Highlands have large sandstone rocks carved out by high ocean tides. The coast has rich farmland and a humid climate. New Brunswick borders the United States in the south and the province of Quebec in the northwest. The province was founded by United Empire Loyalists who moved north during the American Revolution. The capital is Fredericton. Although Canada is a bilingual country, New Brunswick is the only bilingual province. 1/3 of the people speak French as their first language. New Brunswick celebrates its Loyalist, English, and Acadian, French, cultures with traditional music and street festivals. Questions. Name the Atlantic provinces and their capital cities. Well, that would be Newfoundland and Labrador, and the capital is St. John's. Nova Scotia, the capital is Halifax. And New Brunswick, the capital is Fredericton. What industries do each of them have? Well, we'd have to review, but it's forestry and mining for the most part. Agriculture also in the places where the soil is good enough. 3. Which province is the only bilingual province? That's New Brunswick. Question 4. Which ocean is closest to Newfoundland and Labrador? The Atlantic Ocean. 5. Where is Canada's largest naval base located? In the province of Nova Scotia. 6. What province is the smallest in Canada? Well, that would be PEI, or Prince Edward Island. 7. What is another name for Newfoundland? Oh, they call it the Rock because it has such hard, rocky soil. 8. What is the Confederation Bridge? That's a long 12-kilometer bridge, 12 or 13-kilometer bridge that connects PEI with the rest of the mainland. Number 9. Why is the Bay of Fundy famous? Oh, it's famous because it has the highest tides. The water goes up and down more than anywhere else on the earth. Central Canada. Central Canada has 2 provinces, Quebec and Ontario. It is not actually in the center of the country, but there are 4 provinces on the east side and 4 provinces on the west side. More than half of the population of Canada lives on either Ontario or Quebec. Most live in the south, near the Great Lakes and near the St. Lawrence River. The Canadian Shield is in the north. The main industries in the north are forestry and mining. The area is rich in minerals like nickel, gold, silver, and copper. In the south, the soil is much better for farming. The Great Lakes provide fresh water and are used to transport products. Ships from all over the world come down the St. Lawrence River to the Great Lakes and across Lake Superior to Thunder Bay. Most manufacturing and industrial centers are in the south. This area produces 75% of Canada's manufactured goods. Here we see a map of Ontario and Quebec, the central provinces, and we can see how large they are. We can also see that they're not really in the center of Canada, but they're called the center because there are 4 provinces to the west and 4 provinces to the east. Quebec. Quebec is the largest and second most populated province in Canada. About 8 million people live in Quebec. Most of them live near the St. Lawrence River because 90% of Quebec is either in the Arctic or it is Canadian Shield. Most of the people speak French as their first language. The Gaspé Peninsula is south of the St. Lawrence. It stretches east toward the Atlantic Ocean, and it is bordered on the south by New Brunswick and the United States. The Appalachian Mountains also reach into this area. Industry and farming on the Gasp are similar to New Brunswick. Most of Quebec is north of the St. Lawrence River. There are low, round mountains like Laurentians north of the river. The Laurentians get lots of snow in the winter, so the skiing is good. There are many ski resorts near Quebec City. Almost half, 40%, of the agriculture in Quebec is in the St. Lawrence lowlands. Quebec has a large dairy industry that includes cheese making. There are also many maple trees, and much of Canada's maple syrup comes from Quebec. Further north is Shield Country. Important industries in northern Quebec include forestry, mining, and hydroelectricity. Quebec is the biggest producer of pulp and paper in Canada. It is also the biggest producer of hydroelectricity, as there are so many lakes and rivers. Quebec power plants make almost half of the hydroelectricity in Canada. Quebec also exports power to the United States. Quebec City is the capital. It is one of the first places in Canada to be settled by the French. Many of the old buildings have been preserved, and they are tourist attractions. Montreal is the largest city in Quebec. It is one of the biggest manufacturing centers in Canada. It is also the second largest French-speaking city in the world. Only Paris is bigger. Pharmaceuticals and aeronautics are important industries in the province, and Quebec's music, film, literature, and food are known around the world. Quebec is an important member of the La Francophone, or La Francophonie, an international association of French-speaking nations. Ontario. Ontario is the most populated province in Canada, with 12 million people. It has the second largest French-speaking population in Canada. Almost 1/3 of Canadians live in Ontario. Most live in the south near the Great Lakes. Northern Ontario is similar to Quebec. A large part of northern Ontario is Canadian Shield with forests, rocks, swamps, and wilderness. There are plenty of minerals for mining and forestry, and logging are also important. Lakes, rivers and lakes make it easy to transport northern resources to the south for manufacturing. Thunder Bay is an important city at the top of Lake Superior because it is a big grain depot. The grain comes from the Prairie Provinces by railroad. It is loaded onto large ships which take it through the Great Lakes and out through the St. Lawrence River to markets around the world. The southern part of Ontario was originally settled by the United Empire Loyalists after the American Revolution. Southern Ontario is warmer and more fertile than the north. The land is level and good for agriculture. Farmers in the province raise beef and dairy cattle, chickens, and other animals. They grow fruit, vegetables, and grain. The Niagara region is well known for its vineyards and winemaking. Manufacturing is also important in southern Ontario, especially automobiles and steel. Ontario makes 50% of Canada's manufactured goods because it has everything that industry needs: raw materials, cheap transportation, and large cities for markets and workers. Toronto is the capital of Ontario. Toronto is also the largest city in Canada, and it is the financial center of Canada. Many immigrants have settled in Toronto, so it is culturally diverse. Ottawa, the capital of Canada, is also located in Ontario. Niagara Falls, a world-famous tourist attraction, is in Ontario. 1. Name the provinces in central Canada and their capital cities. Well, that would be Quebec and Ontario. And the capital of Quebec is Quebec City, and the capital of Ontario is Toronto. 2. Which province has the largest population? Ontario has the largest population. What portion of Canada's population lives in central Canada? Well, I think it was at least a third. I just checked back through the chapter and saw that more than half of Canada's population live in central Canada, either in Ontario or Quebec. Which province is the largest? Well, as far as size goes, Quebec is the largest. But population-wise, Ontario is the largest, and then Quebec is the second largest in population, but the biggest, most land area is in Quebec. 5. 1/3 of Canadians live in which province? That would be in Ontario. Number 6. Where do most French-speaking Canadians live? Most French-speaking would live in Quebec. 7. Which province is Canada's largest producer of hydroelectricity? That would be Ontario, I believe. No, I'm wrong. I quickly looked back, and it's actually Quebec is the largest producer of hydroelectricity in Canada because it has so many lakes and rivers. 8. Which province is the biggest producer of minerals? Well, I'm going to guess Ontario, but I'm going to quickly look back. Well, I read all the way through this section again, and I couldn't see where it says which province is the biggest producer of minerals, and so I hope that doesn't come on an exam. But I guessed Ontario. I guess I'll stick with that because there's so much manufacturing there. But Quebec and Ontario both have the Canadian Shield, which is full of minerals, so it could be either one of those provinces. Maybe you can read the chapter more carefully and find the answer for me. Number 9. What is the major river in Quebec? The St. Lawrence River. 10. What is important about Montreal? We read that it's the second largest French-speaking city in the world. Only Paris has more French-speaking people. 11. What is a major tourist attraction in Ontario? That's probably the Niagara Falls. 12. Why is Thunder Bay an important city? Thunder Bay is important because it's a port where products are shipped from the Prairie Provinces like grain, and then it's shipped across Lake Superior, out the St. Lawrence Seaway, and to the Atlantic Ocean, and shipped around the world. Prairie Provinces. There are 3 Prairie Provinces: Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Although there are some areas of Canadian Shield in all 3 provinces, most of the land is fairly flat and fertile, which makes it ideal for agriculture. Each province has different weather patterns, moisture, and landscapes, but they tend to be drier than the rest of the country. The prairies are hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Here we see an image of the Prairie Provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Manitoba. Manitoba is actually the geographical center of Canada. Most of the province is covered by forests and the Canadian Shield. In the south, there is a region of prairie that has good soil for farming. Because there are so many large and small lakes and rivers in the province, Manitoba has been called the land of 100,000 lakes. Lake Winnipeg is the largest, but Lake Manitoba, Lake Winnipegosis, and Cedar Lake are also big. Much of the space in the center of Manitoba is filled by these lakes. Agriculture is the most important industry, but there is also mining, hydroelectricity, and some manufacturing. Manitoba is very windy, and wind is becoming a good source of energy. Manitoba is a large province, but it has a small population, less than 1.5 million people. 60% of the population lives in Winnipeg, the capital city. Portage and Main in downtown Winnipeg is one of Canada's most famous street corners. People joke that it is the coldest and windiest street corner in Canada. St. Boniface, a part of Winnipeg, is the largest Francophone community west of Ontario. Manitoba has the largest Aboriginal population in Canada. 15% of the Aboriginal people of Canada live in Manitoba. 14% of Manitobans are descended from families that came from the Ukraine. Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, Canada's breadbasket, was once called the breadbasket of the world. It has 40% of the best farmland in Canada. Most of Saskatchewan is very flat, and the most important industry is agriculture. Saskatchewan is the largest producer of grains and oilseeds in the country. In the north, there is an area of Canadian Shield where there is mining and forestry. Saskatchewan is also a large producer of potash, uranium, oil, and natural gas. Like Manitoba and Alberta, winters can be very cold and summers can be very hot. The capital of Saskatchewan is Regina. The training academy for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is located in Regina. Saskatoon, another city in Saskatchewan, is larger than Regina, and it is the headquarters for the mining industry. The University of Saskatchewan, located in Saskatoon, is an important education, research, and technology center. Alberta. Alberta has the largest population of all the Prairie Provinces. Almost 4 million people live in Alberta. The land is different from the other two provinces. There is a small area of Canadian Shield in the northeast corner, but most of the rest of the province is a flat plain with small rolling hills. In the north, the plain is covered in forests. The further west you go, the hillier it becomes, and the Rocky Mountains are in the west. Because moist air from the Pacific Ocean has a hard time getting over the Rocky Mountains, the winds that come from the west are dry. They create almost desert-like conditions. The southern half of the province is especially dry, so drought is a problem. In the winter, the same winds can bring Chinooks. These are warm winds that can raise the temperature 25 degrees or more. Alberta has also been an agriculture province. Because it is drier and hillier than Saskatchewan, more people raise beef cattle. In the northern forest, there is some logging. Alberta is also an energy province and has been since the discovery of oil in Leduc in 1947. Oil and gas can be found in all parts of the province, but the biggest oil sands fields are located in the north, near Fort McMurray and in the Peace River region. Tourism is another major industry in Alberta. There are 5 national parks: Banff, Jasper, Waterton, Elk Island, and Wood Buffalo. The Badlands near Drumheller and Brooks are famous for dinosaur and other prehistoric fossils. The Royal Tyrrell Museum is located just outside of Drumheller. It is a world-famous tourist attraction. The capital of Alberta is Edmonton. Calgary is the headquarters for most of the energy companies. Questions. 1. Name the Prairie Provinces and their capital cities. Well, there's Manitoba, and the capital there is Winnipeg. Saskatchewan, the capital is Regina. And Alberta, the capital is Edmonton. 2. Where are the Canadian Rockies? The Canadian Rockies are located in Alberta. 3. Which province is Canada's major producer of oil and gas? That would be Alberta. 4. Which province is one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world and a leading wheat producer? That would probably be Saskatchewan. 5. What is the capital city of Alberta? Edmonton. 6. Which province is known as the land of 100,000 lakes? I believe that was Manitoba. 7. In which province is Banff National Park located? That would also be in Alberta. 8. What is the largest lake in Manitoba? Oh, I'd have to quickly look back in the chapter, and it is Lake Winnipeg, which is also the name of the capital city. That'll help us remember. 9. What is a Chinook? Chinook is a real warm wind that blows in over the Rocky Mountains. We feel it in Alberta. The West Coast, British Columbia. The West Coast region has only one province, British Columbia. British Columbia, or BC, is different from all the other provinces because of its location and geography. The mountains are higher, and the Pacific Ocean is warmer than the Atlantic waters off the east coast of Canada. Much of the province is covered by huge mountain ranges. The most famous are the Rocky Mountains, which are also in Alberta. The coast mountains extend along the entire Pacific coast. The Pacific Maritime region is the part of BC that is right on the coast. Because of the warm air from the ocean, the coast is warmer and wetter than the rest of Canada, and there is little snow. There are tall cedar trees and old forests. There is even a northern rainforest. The interior plain is in between the mountain ranges. The interior plain is a flatter area, so it is good for farming and ranching. In the southern Okanagan Valley, they grow fruit and vegetables and make wine. Further north, there is good grassland for cattle. 2/3 of the province is covered in forests. Forestry is the most important industry in British Columbia. BC provides 60% of Canada's lumber. It also exports lumber to the United States and to countries in Asia. Lumber, newsprint, and pulp and paper are very important. You may remember that Quebec produces most of the pulp and paper in Canada, but BC has the largest forestry industry. Mining, fishing, and agriculture, fruit and wine, are also important industries. Of course, tourism is very important to British Columbia, as the scenery is spectacular. There are 600 provincial parks. The mountains are great for skiing and hiking, and sport fishing is popular all over BC, especially on the coast. Whale watching is another popular tourist attraction. About 4 million people live in British Columbia. Victoria, located on Vancouver Island, is the capital. It is a popular tourist attraction or destination. And it is also the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet of Canada's Navy. Vancouver, located on the mainland, is an excellent deep water seaport. It is called Canada's Pacific Gateway because it is the gateway to Asia and the Pacific. Vancouver is the largest city in the province. It has a large Asian community. After English, Chinese and Punjabi are the most spoken languages in Vancouver. Questions. 1. Which mountain range is on the border between Alberta and British Columbia? That would be the Rocky Mountains. 2. What provinces or territories are in the West Coast region? Well, there's only one province, and that would be the province of BC. 3. Why is British Columbia known as Canada's Pacific Gateway? Because Vancouver is the gateway to the Pacific countries of Asia. Number 4, what is the capital of BC? The capital is Victoria. 5, what is the most important industry in BC? Well, there are lots of industries, agriculture, fruit, but the most important is probably the forestry industry. The North. The Northern Territories cover more than 1/3 of Canada's land area, but the population is very small. Only about 100,000 people live in the Northern Territories, which is about the same as the population of Red Deer, Alberta. In the far north, there are no large trees, just shrubs, grass, lichens, and moss. This type of land is called tundra. The soil is always frozen. This is called permafrost, and it is very difficult to grow anything. South of the tundra is an area called the taiga that has spruce and pine trees. The winters are long and cold, and the summers are short and dry. The north is called the land of the midnight sun. In the middle of summer, there can be 24 hours of daylight. In midwinter, however, it is still dark in the middle of the day. Although some of the Aboriginal people in the north still hunt, fish, and trap like their ancestors did, most people work in the mining industry: gold, lead, copper, diamonds, and zinc, or in the oil and gas industry. Some Inuit artists create and sell their work to art collectors in Canada and around the world. Here we see the northern part of Canada with the territories, the Yukon Territory, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Yukon. The Yukon borders on British Columbia and Alaska, USA. It is very mountainous. The highest mountain in Canada, Mount Logan, is in the Yukon. It was named after Sir William Logan, a great Canadian scientist. Like the other territories, there is permafrost in the north and trees in the south. The coldest temperature ever recorded in Canada was recorded in the Yukon, minus 63 degrees Celsius. In the 1890s, during the Yukon Gold Rush, people from all over the world came from all over the world to look for gold. Not many people found it, but a few people became very rich. Most of the people returned home, but some stayed. Mining is still a very important industry in the Yukon. Whitehorse is the capital of the Yukon. In 1900, the White Pass and Yukon railways were built to link Skagway, Alaska with Whitehorse. Today, this is a spectacular train trip for tourists. Northwest Territories. The Northwest Territories are in the middle of the three territories. The Northwest Territories are in the middle north of the three territories. Alberta. If you travel north from British Columbia, Alberta, you will be in western British Columbia. You will be the Mackenzie River system, the second largest. The Mackenzie River system, the second largest river system in North America. Empties into Bear Lake is the largest lake that is entirely in Canada. The largest lake that is entirely in Canada. The Great Slave Lake is the deepest. The Great Slave Lake in North America. The deepest lake. Almost half of the territory has no trees. Almost half of the territory. More than half of the population of the Northwest Territories. More than half of the population of the Northwest Territories is Aboriginal and Inuit. Métis. Half of the population of the Northwest Territories lives in Yellowknife. Of the Northwest Territories lives in Yellowknife is called the diamond capital of the world. Yellowknife is called because mining diamonds of the world, as well as gold. Because mining is an important industry, as well as gold. Other people work at government jobs or make Aboriginal work at government jobs or make Aboriginal arts and crafts. The government of the Northwest Territories is different from governments of the Yukon Territory and the provinces. The Legislative Assembly operates by consensus. Everyone has to agree in order for laws to be passed. Nunavut. Nunavut is the newest of the territories. Until 1999, it was part of the Northwest Territories. Nunavut means our land in Inuktitut. Inuktitut is one of the official languages of Nunavut. There are very few trees, and the ocean is frozen most of the year. Most people make a living by traditional means such as hunting and fishing and selling Inuit carvings and art. The capital is Iqaluit, which is located on the southeast coast of Baffin Island in the Arctic Ocean. The Canadian Rangers, a division of the Canadian Forces Reserves, police the North from Resolute to the magnetic North Pole. Their presence shows that Canada has sovereignty over the far north. Questions. 1. What region covers more than 1/3 of Canada? It would be the northern region. 2. Name the northern territories and their capital cities. Yukon, and the capital is Whitehorse. Northwest Territories, the capital is Yellowknife. And Nunavut, the capital is Iqaluit. Number 3. What region is called the land of the midnight sun? Well, it's the northern region because they have such long days in the summer and long nights in the winter. 4. What is the name of Canada's highest mountain? Where is it? That's Mount Logan, and I believe that was in the Yukon, but we'll have to check back. 5. What is the diamond capital of the world? The diamond capital, I thought, was the Northwest Territories, but again, we'll have to check back. Let's take a look. Yes, I quickly looked back, and it is the Northwest Territories where they mine so many diamonds. 6. What language is an official language of Nunavut. That was Tuktoyaktuk, I believe.